It's mine. The house is legally mine. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I watched my family's faces transform, confusion melting into shock, shock crystallizing into horror. The engagement party's festive chatter died as if someone had cut the power to the entire ballroom. My sister Vicky's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the sudden silence like gunfire. That was 3 months ago. Today, I'm standing in my new condo, boxes still half unpacked, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across walls that finally belong to me, really belong to me. No secrets, no lies, no family obligations masquerading as love. But let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you how Margaret Bennett, the invisible daughter, finally learned to be seen. Flashback 8 years earlier, the night everything began. The garage smelled of motor oil and desperation. I found Dad there at 2 a.m., surrounded by foreclosure notices spread across his workbench like tarot cards predicting doom. "I've lost everything," he whispered without looking up. His voice was hollow, scraped raw. "The business, our savings, the house. How do I tell your mother?" Robert Bennett had spent 30 years building Bennett Construction from a two-man operation into the most respected contractor in our county. The 2008 financial crisis didn't just wound him, it eviscerated everything he'd worked for. Clients defaulted, projects vanished overnight, and suddenly a man who'd never missed a mortgage payment in his life was staring at bankruptcy. I was 44 then, recently divorced, running my small accounting firm with the methodical precision that had always made my family dismiss me as reliable Maggie. They had no idea that reliability was about to become their salvation. "What if you don't have to tell her?" I heard myself say. Dad's head snapped up. His eyes were red-rimmed, older than I'd ever seen them. "What do you mean?" I picked up the foreclosure notice. 90 days. That's all we had. What if we find another way? Present day Helen's office. "You've been carrying them for 8 years, Helen Rodriguez said, reviewing the stack of documents I'd brought to her law office. "Every mortgage payment, every repair, every tax bill. And they still don't know?" Helen had been my closest friend since law school, mine at business, hers at law. She understood numbers the way I did, but she also understood people in ways I was still learning. "They think Dad's insurance covered everything," I admitted. "The furnace replacement, the roof repair, the property taxes during COVID. I've been working overtime for almost a decade just to keep them afloat." Helen set down the deed transfer documents. Her expression was carefully neutral, lawyer face, I called it. "Maggie, what you did. Forging your father's signature on the refinancing papers. I know. The weight of that secret had been crushing me for years. But the house would have been lost. Mom would have been devastated. And Dad. I thought of him in that garage, broken and ashamed. He would never have recovered. So you saved them." Helen's voice was soft. "And they have no idea." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This morning, my mother called to tell me they're meeting with a real estate agent. They want to sell their house to pay for Vicky's wedding." Flashback 6 months earlier. Dorothy's selective memory. "Margaret, darling, could you be more careful with those dishes? They're my grandmother's china." I bit back the response that wanted to escape, that I'd been the one to pay for the insurance that protected her precious china when a pipe burst last winter. Instead, I dried each piece with the reverence Dorothy Bennett demanded, watching her flutter around the kitchen like a queen surveying her domain. At 75, my mother retained the imperious bearing of someone born into what she called proper society. The Worthington family had money once, old Charleston money that bought respect and social position. That money was long gone, but Dorothy's expectations weren't. "Vicky's bringing someone special to lunch today," she announced, adjusting a flower arrangement that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries. "A gentleman friend." Even at 48, Vicky was still Dorothy's baby girl, the daughter who'd been blessed with the Worthington beauty, blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, blue eyes that could make men forget their own names. For 20 years, Vicky had drifted from one failed venture to another. Modeling that never quite took off, an esthetician's license that gathered dust, a beauty salon that closed within 18 months. Each failure was followed by the same pattern. Vicky would arrive at the family home in tears. Dorothy would make soothing noises and open the checkbook, and I would quietly cover whatever expenses they couldn't handle. I hope he appreciates what a treasure our Vicky is, Dorothy continued. She's been through so much disappointment. Disappointment. That's what we called Vicky's inability to hold a job, maintain a relationship, or take responsibility for anything in her adult life. Meanwhile, I'd built my accounting firm into a 15-employee operation, owned my own home, and somehow still had time to subsidize my family's delusions. But I was the disappointment because I'd never married again after my divorce 8 years ago. Because I wore practical clothes and sensible shoes. Because I chose financial security over whatever romantic fantasy Dorothy thought I should be chasing. Present day the Sunday lunch announcement 5 carats. Vicky squealed, bursting through the front door with her usual sense of timing. Can you believe it? 5 perfect carats. The diamond on her finger caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the dining room windows, sending rainbow fractals dancing across the walls. It was a beautiful ring, probably worth more than most people's cars. Marcus is absolutely perfect, Vicky gushed, allowing our parents to examine the ring like archaeologists studying a precious artifact. He's an investor, very successful. He says nothing less than perfection would do for his princess. I watched Dad's face carefully. Robert Bennett had learned to school his expressions over the years, but I knew the signs. The slight tightening around his eyes when money was mentioned, the way his fingers drummed against his coffee cup when stress built up. He'd been having those episodes more frequently lately, especially when Dorothy went on spending sprees. We should start planning immediately, Dorothy declared, her voice taking on the commanding tone she'd inherited from generations of Worthington women. Something befitting the occasion. The Worthington name has a reputation to maintain. Actually, Vicky said, settling into her usual chair with feline grace. Marcus and I were thinking of the Harbor Club. They have this incredible ballroom that overlooks the water. My blood went cold. The Harbor Club was old Charleston elite, the kind of place where wedding receptions started at $50,000 and climbed rapidly from there. The Harbor Club? I managed to keep my voice level. That's substantial. Don't worry about the money. Dorothy waved her hand with aristocratic dismissal. We'll simply tap into the house equity. It's practically paid off anyway. The lies we tell ourselves. The house that was practically paid off because I'd been making every payment for 8 years. The equity they planned to tap belonged to me, legally and morally, though they had no idea. Besides, Vicky added with a smirk that reminded me why I'd spent most of our childhood avoiding her. Some of us chose careers that actually provide value to society. Not everyone can be an accountant. There it was. The casual dismissal that had defined our relationship for 48 years. Vicky, the golden child whose beauty and charm made her special. Maggie, the reliable workhorse whose contributions were invisible until they weren't there. Flashback the decision. 8 years ago. The laptop screen glowed in my kitchen at 3 a.m., illuminating the mortgage refinancing application that would change everything. Dad's signature wasn't hard to forge. I'd watched him sign my school forms, my graduation documents, countless birthday cards over the years. His handwriting was as familiar to me as my own. I told myself it was temporary. Just until his business recovered, until he could get back on his feet. I'd transfer the deed back once things stabilized. But things never stabilized. Dad's depression deepened with each failed job interview, each contract that went to younger competitors. Mom's spending actually increased, as if maintaining appearances could somehow restore what they'd lost. And Vicky. Vicky just continued being Vicky, beautiful and useless and completely dependent on parents who could no longer afford to support her. So the temporary arrangement became permanent. The house payments became my responsibility. The repairs, the taxes, the insurance, all quietly handled by the invisible daughter who never asked for credit or recognition. Present day, the confrontation builds. We're thinking of a destination wedding too, Vicky continued, oblivious to the tension building around the table. Maybe Tuscany. Marcus has connections there. A destination wedding. On top of the Harbor Club reception. I calculated rapidly. Airfare for the family, accommodations, event costs. We were looking at over $200,000, easily. That sounds wonderful, darling, Dorothy cooed. We'll make it work somehow. Dad remained silent, but I saw his knuckles whiten around his coffee cup. He knew. Maybe not the specifics, but he understood that the money Dorothy was so casually spending didn't exist. Not in any account he could access. I should mention, Vicky added with studied casualness. Marcus's financial advisor looked at the house last week. He says in this market, we could get at least 600,000 for it. Maybe more. The room seemed to tilt. They'd already had the house appraised. Without telling me, without asking my opinion, they'd invited a stranger to evaluate the property I'd been paying for. An appraisal? I managed. Just preliminary, Dorothy said quickly. We wanted to know our options. Our options. The pronoun was like a slap. Our house, our equity, our decisions. As if I were still the dependent daughter who lived on their charity instead of the other way around. My phone buzzed. A text from Helen. Dinner tonight? I have news about the deed situation. I should go, I said, standing abruptly. Some of us work on Sundays. Always so dedicated, Vicky sighed with mock admiration. I don't know how you do it, working with numbers all day. I'd die of boredom. I paused at the dining room door, looking back at my family seated around the antique table I'd helped save from creditors 8 years ago. They'd already dismissed me, their attention focused entirely on Vicky's ring and wedding plans. Actually, I said quietly, I find numbers very revealing. They don't lie, unlike people. Present day Helen's revelation. The deed transfer is ironclad, Helen assured me over dinner that evening. Whatever ethical concerns we might have about how you obtained it, the legal reality is simple. You own that house, free and clear. We were sitting in her favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where the wine was good and the lighting was dim enough for confidential conversations. Helen had changed out of her lawyer's suit into jeans and a sweater, but her expression remained professionally serious. They can't sell it without your permission, she continued. They can't borrow against it. They can't even list it. Any real estate agent who does proper due diligence will discover that Robert and Dorothy Bennett have no legal standing to make decisions about that property. I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that my investment was protected, dread about what would happen when my family discovered the truth. What would you do? I asked. Helen considered the question while twirling pasta around her fork. Honestly, I'd have told them years ago. But I understand why you didn't. Your father's pride, your mother's expectations. She was being diplomatic. Dorothy's expectations were legendary in our social circle. Appearances mattered more than reality. Status trumped honesty. The Worthington name carried obligations that couldn't be discharged by something as mundane as bankruptcy. The question now, Helen continued, is what you want to happen. Do you want to stop the wedding? Do you want to tell them the truth? Do you want to sell the house yourself and give them the proceeds? I want them to see me, I said before I could stop myself. Just once, I want them to see me as something other than reliable, boring Margaret who handles the details while everyone else gets to be interesting. Helen's smile was sad and knowing. Then maybe it's time they learned what those details actually cost. Flashback the pattern. 6 years of invisible support. The roof repair came during the summer when Vicky was posting Instagram photos from her European adventure, 3 weeks in Italy that cost more than most people's annual salary. I wrote the check for $18,000 while watching her stories about vineyard tours and 5-star hotels. The furnace died during the coldest week of February. Dad told everyone his business insurance covered the replacement cost. I worked overtime for 2 months to pay for it. The property taxes during COVID nearly broke me. While Vicky livestreamed her pandemic skincare routine from mom and dad's guest room, I was covering a $12,000 tax bill with money I'd planned to use for my own business expansion. Each time, I told myself it was temporary. Each time, I convinced myself that my family's gratitude and recognition would come eventually. Each time, I was wrong. They didn't see sacrifice. They saw things working out the way they always had. The Bennett family luck, Mom called it. The way problems just seemed to solve themselves around our house. Luck. 8 years of exhaustion, stress, and financial sacrifice, and they called it luck. Present day, the engagement party plans. It's going to be absolutely magical, Vicky gushed over the phone 3 weeks later. We've booked the Riverside Pavilion for the engagement party. You should see the space, Maggie. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, crystal chandeliers, room for 200 guests. 200 guests. My calculator brain was already running numbers. Venue rental, catering, flowers, photography, music. Conservative estimate, $40,000. For one night. Marcus insists on doing everything properly, Vicky continued. He says his future wife deserves nothing but the best. I wondered if Marcus had any idea how the best was being financed. Did he know about the house appraisal, the equity calculations, the casual way my family was spending money that didn't actually belong to them? Of course, we'll need the house sale to go through soon, Vicky added, her tone becoming businesslike. Marcus's people say we should list it next month to maximize market timing. Marcus's people. Financial advisors and attorneys who saw my family's assets as numbers on a spreadsheet. They had no idea about foreclosure notices in garages, about sleepless nights and forged signatures and 8 years of secret sacrifice. Has Dad spoken to a real estate agent yet? I asked carefully. Oh, you don't need to worry about those details, Vicky said with a laugh. Marcus is handling everything. His team knows exactly how to maximize our return. Our return. The possessive pronoun again, as casual as breathing. Vicky had never made a mortgage payment, never paid a property tax bill, never stayed awake worrying about interest rates or market fluctuations. But somehow, it was our return. I should let you go, I said. I know you're busy with wedding planning. You'll love the engagement party, Vicky said. We're having it catered by that place Mom likes, you know, the one with the amazing salmon. And there'll be champagne, real French champagne. Marcus won't settle for anything domestic. After hanging up, I sat in my office chair for a long time, staring at the framed photo on my desk. It showed our family from 5 years ago, Dad's arm around Mom, Vicky, and me flanking them. We looked happy, normal, like any successful middle-class family. The photo was taken the weekend after I'd made my first mortgage payment on their house. None of them knew, of course. They just knew that everything had worked out somehow, the way it always did. The engagement party final preparation. The envelope arrived by courier on a Thursday afternoon. Thick cream paper, expensive printing, Vicky's name embossed in gold script. Victoria Bennett and Marcus Williams request the pleasure of your company. Inside was a response card, a detailed itinerary, and a note in Vicky's handwriting. Can't wait to celebrate with family. We're something festive. This is going to be the party of the year. I studied the venue information. The Riverside Pavilion was Old Charleston at its most exclusive, the kind of place where reservations required connections and events required substantial deposits. The catering menu featured items like pan-seared Chilean sea bass and champagne cocktail reception. Even the response card was engraved. My phone rang. Helen's number. Are you going? She asked without preamble. To the engagement party? I think I have to. No, Helen said carefully. I mean, are you going to tell them? Because if Marcus's team is handling the house sale, they're going to discover the deed situation within days. Better for it to come from you than from some attorney's office. I looked at the invitation again, calculating costs in my head. $40,000 for one party. Maybe 50, given the level of detail Vicky was demanding. All financed by equity that belonged to me. You know what? I said finally. I think it's time for a family announcement of my own. The night before Dorothy's, Margaret, darling, I just want to make sure you understand how important tomorrow night is for our family. Dorothy's voice carried that particular tone she used when delivering instructions disguised as conversation. I was in my condo, reviewing the documents Helen had prepared, property deeds, mortgage statements, bank transfers. 8 years of proof, organized chronologically. Important how? I asked. Well, the Worthington name has certain expectations, and the Williams family is very well connected. This marriage could open doors for all of us. Doors. As if my family's salvation lay in Vicky's ability to charm a wealthy man rather than in their daughter's 8 years of financial sacrifice. I just hope you'll dress appropriately, Dorothy continued. Something festive, something that shows we understand the significance of the occasion. Don't worry, Mom. I'll dress exactly as appropriately as the occasion deserves. There was a pause. Dorothy's social instincts were finely tuned. She'd heard something in my tone that made her nervous. You're not planning anything disruptive, are you? Because this is Vicky's moment, and she's been through so much disappointment already. Disappointment. Again with that word. As if Vicky's failures were things that happened to her rather than choices she made. I wouldn't dream of disrupting anything, I said truthfully. I'm just planning to share some news of my own. The engagement party opening. The Riverside Pavilion glowed like a fairy tale castle as I pulled into the valet parking area. Crystal chandeliers visible through floor to ceiling windows, flowers arranged with museum quality precision. Guests in evening were stepping out of luxury cars. It was beautiful. Objectively, undeniably beautiful. It was also $47,000 of beauty, financed by money my family thought they owned. Maggie. I turned to see my cousin Zoe approaching with her phone already recording. At 25, Zoe had parlayed her social media presence into a career of sorts: events, sponsorships, brand partnerships. She specialized in documenting family gatherings for her followers. You look amazing, she said, zooming in on my dress. That color is perfect on you. I'd chosen carefully. A deep navy dress that was elegant without being flashy, expensive without being obvious. The kind of dress that would look appropriate for any announcement I might make. Thanks. The party looks incredible. Right. Vicky really went all out. The flower budget alone was like, well, more than most people spend on cars. Zoe laughed, not realizing how precisely accurate her statement was. But Marcus said money was no object for his princess. Money was no object. Because it wasn't actually their money. Inside the pavilion, I accepted a glass of champagne from a server and surveyed the crowd. 200 guests, just as Vicky had promised. Family, friends, business associates, people from what Dorothy called our social circle. People who would remember this evening for years to come. Perfect. The speeches begin. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. Marcus Williams commanded the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to being heard. At 50, he had the polished appearance of someone whose money was old enough to seem effortless, silver at his temples, suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body, watch that cost more than most people's annual salary. First, I want to thank you all for joining Victoria and me on this special evening, he began, his arm around Vicky's waist. When I met this remarkable woman 6 months ago, I knew I'd found something rare: beauty, intelligence, and a spirit that lights up every room she enters. The crowd murmured appreciation. Vicky glowed under the attention, her 5-carat ring catching the chandelier light. Of course, Marcus continued. I also want to thank Robert and Dorothy Bennett for raising such an extraordinary daughter, and for their generous offer to help make our wedding dreams come true. I felt my jaw clench. Generous offer. As if my parents were magnanimously choosing to support their daughter's wedding rather than planning to spend money that didn't belong to them. The Bennett family home has been in their family for generations, Marcus announced. And they've decided to pass that legacy forward by selling it to fund Victoria's perfect wedding. It's the kind of selfless gesture that shows what family really means. Applause rippled through the crowd. I saw Dad standing near the bar, his face carefully neutral, but his hands shaking slightly around his whiskey glass. He knew the truth, even if he'd never admitted it aloud. So please, Marcus raised his glass. Join me in toasting Robert and Dorothy Bennett and their beautiful daughter Victoria, soon to be Victoria Williams. The crowd drank. I set my untouched champagne on a nearby table and walked toward the small stage where Marcus stood with his arm still around my sister. The truth revealed. Excuse me, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. I'd like to say something about that generous family legacy. Marcus looked startled. Vicky's smile faltered. Dorothy moved toward the stage with the expression of someone preparing to manage a social crisis. I'm Margaret Bennett, I announced to the room, stepping onto the low platform. Victoria's sister. And I think there's been some confusion about our families. Generosity. Maggie, Vicky hissed. What are you doing? Telling the truth. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the document Helen had prepared, a folder containing copies of every important paper about the house that Marcus just described as our family legacy. I opened the folder, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The Bennett family home hasn't been in our family for generations, I announced clearly. It's been in my name legally, completely, solely, for the past 8 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the servers stopped moving. What are you talking about? Dorothy demanded, her voice sharp with panic. I'm talking about 8 years of mortgage payments, I continued, pulling out bank statements. 8 years of property taxes, insurance premiums, repair costs, emergency expenses. All paid by me, from my supposedly boring accounting business, while everyone assumed that Dad's business insurance or family luck was somehow covering everything. I held up the deed transfer document. I own the house. I have for 8 years. Every payment, every decision, every expense, all mine. And now you want to sell my property to pay for a party. Marcus had gone very pale. His arm dropped from Vicky's waist as he stepped back. That's impossible, Vicky said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? I turned to face the crowd, 200 guests who had come to celebrate love and family and generosity. Would you like to see the paperwork? The mortgage statements? The deed with my name on it? I spread documents across the small table on the stage. December 2019, new roof, $18,000. March 2020, property taxes during COVID, $12,000. September 2021, furnace replacement, $8,000. All paid by me, while my family planned European vacations and engagement parties. The crowd was murmuring now, phone cameras discreetly raised. Zoe was recording everything, her followers getting a front row seat to the Bennett family's private drama. But that's not the most interesting part, I continued. The most interesting part is that when my father's business failed 8 years ago, when we were facing foreclosure, when our family was about to lose everything, I made a choice. I saved us. I took over the mortgage, I protected my parents' dignity, and I never asked for credit or recognition or even basic acknowledgement. I looked directly at Dad, who was staring at me with a mixture of shame and amazement. And now, after 8 years of secret sacrifice, my family wants to sell my house to pay for my sister's wedding to a man who's been dating her for 6 months. The silence stretched. Marcus was looking at Vicky as if seeing her for the first time. Dorothy's face had gone through several color changes. Dad remained frozen by the bar. So here's what's actually going to happen, I announced, gathering my papers. The house isn't being sold. The wedding budget is going to need some dramatic revision. And this family is going to have a very long conversation about what generous actually means. I stepped down from the stage, walked through the crowd of stunned guests, and headed for the exit. Behind me, I heard the explosion beginning, Vicky's voice rising in panic, Dorothy's sharp commands, Marcus asking pointed questions about financial disclosure. The fairy tale was crumbling in real time, and this time I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up the mess. The aftermath, 3 hours later, my phone had been ringing nonstop since I got home. 17 missed calls from Vicky, 12 from Dorothy, 3 from Dad, and approximately 40 text messages ranging from accusations to pleas to threats. I ignored them all and poured myself a very large glass of wine. Helen arrived at 11 p.m. with Chinese takeout and a bottle of bourbon. So, she said, settling onto my couch, I take it the engagement party was eventful. Zoe livestreamed the whole thing, I said, showing her my phone. It's already been shared 3,000 times. Helen watched the video of my announcement, her liar's mind probably cataloging every legal implication. You know this is going to change everything, she said finally. I hope so. Your family is going to be furious. They're already furious. I gestured to my still ringing phone. But for the first time in 8 years, they're furious at someone who actually has power in this situation. Helen raised her bourbon glass. To power, to truth, I corrected, clinking my glass against hers. We drank in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the harbor lights twinkle through my condo windows. What happens now? Helen asked. Now. Now they learn to live within their actual means. Vicky gets a reality check about what she can afford. Mom discovers that social status requires actual money, not just expectations. And Dad. I paused, thinking about the look on his face when I'd revealed the truth. Maybe Dad finally forgives himself for failing 8 years ago. And you? I considered the question. For 8 years, I'd been the invisible daughter, the reliable one who handled problems quietly. Tonight, for the first time, I'd been seen, really seen, by everyone who mattered. I think, I said slowly, I'm finally going to find out who Margaret Bennett is when she's not carrying everyone else's burdens. 3 weeks later, coffee with Dad. The cafe was nearly empty at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Dad sat across from me, looking older than his 76 years, but somehow more present than he'd been in years. The house sold, he said without preamble. I nodded. I handled the sale myself, through a real estate agent who understood the complicated family dynamics involved. 820,000, I said, above asking price. That's that's more than I ever imagined. We sat in silence for a moment. Since the engagement party, our relationship had been awkward but honest in a way it had never been before. No more pretenses. No more polite fiction about where the money was coming from. I've been thinking, Dad continued, about that night 8 years ago. In the garage. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. I've been thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't found me there. If you hadn't made the choice you made. I remembered that night vividly. The foreclosure notices, his despair, my decision to forge his signature on refinancing papers that would change all our lives. I was going to tell your mother the next morning, he said quietly. About the bankruptcy, about losing the house. I was going to suggest we move to a smaller place, maybe rent something until I could get back on my feet. Why didn't you? Because suddenly the bank was being understanding about our payments. Suddenly the insurance was covering repairs. Suddenly everything was manageable. He met my eyes. I knew it wasn't really insurance, Margaret. I knew someone was helping, but I was too proud, too ashamed to ask who. The weight of 8 years of unspoken knowledge hung between us. I should have asked, he said. I should have acknowledged what you were doing. I should have thanked you. You don't owe me thanks for choosing to help my family. Yes, I do. Dad reached across the table and took my hand. And I owe you an apology for letting you carry that burden alone. My throat felt tight. What about Mom? Vicky? Dad's expression darkened. Your mother is adjusting to new realities. The Williams family withdrew their support after Marcus broke the engagement. Apparently, financial transparency is important to them. I wasn't surprised. Marcus had seemed like the type of man who did thorough research before making investments, and marriage, in his world, was definitely an investment. And Vicky? Vicky is angry. She's staying with your mother, and they're both convinced you deliberately sabotaged her happiness. Did I? Dad considered the question seriously. You told the truth about a situation that had become unsustainable. If that sabotaged anything, it was delusions, not happiness. We finished our coffee in contemplative silence. Outside the cafe windows, life in our small Charleston neighborhood continued as it always had, people walking dogs, running errands, living ordinary lives that didn't require 8 years of secret sacrifice to maintain. What will you do now? Dad asked as we prepared to leave. I'm thinking about expanding the business, I said. Maybe opening a second office. I've got some capital now, and 8 years of experience managing complicated financial situations. Dad smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since that night in the garage. Your mother and Vicky think you've become selfish, he said. But I think you've finally learned to value yourself appropriately. 6 months later, the new normal. My phone buzzed with a text as I finished reviewing quarterly reports for my newest client. Helen's name appeared on the screen. Dinner tonight? I have news. I was closing my laptop when my assistant knocked on the office door. Ms. Bennett? There's a Dorothy Bennett here to see you. She says she's your mother. I hadn't spoken to Dorothy since the engagement party. 6 months of silence, 6 months of letting her adjust to the reality that her financial safety net had a name and a bank account and opinions of her own. Send her in. Dorothy entered my office looking every one of her 75 years. The imperious bearing was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen before: uncertainty. She sat in the chair across from my desk without being invited, her hands clutched around a worn leather purse. "You've done well for yourself," she said, gesturing around my expanded office. "This is much nicer than your old space." "Business has been good," I replied carefully. Word travels fast when you're known for handling complicated financial situations discreetly. We stared at each other across 8 months of silence and 48 years of accumulated grievances. "Vicky moved out last week," Dorothy said finally. "She got a job at a department store. Cosmetics counter." I waited. Dorothy had come here for a reason, and it wasn't to update me on Vicky's employment status. "She's living with a roommate now. A girl from work. Splitting rent on a small apartment downtown." Dorothy's voice carried a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "She seems different, more focused." "That's good." "Is it?" Dorothy's question was genuine. "I keep thinking I failed her somehow. Spoiled her. Made her think the world owed her something. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross." "You gave her everything she asked for," I said. "That felt like love. But it wasn't, was it?" Dorothy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Love would have been teaching her to stand on her own feet. Love would have been recognizing what you were doing for all of us." I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of resentment I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there. "Why are you here, Mom?" Dorothy opened her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it on my desk with shaking hands. "It's a check," she said. "For rent. I'm moving into a senior community next month. Independent living, but with support services available. I can afford it on Dad's Social Security and my small inheritance from Grandmother Worthington." I looked at the check. It was made out to me for $600. "I can't take your house payments back," Dorothy continued. "I can't undo 8 years of taking you for granted. But I can start paying my own way now. Even if it's just rent to my own daughter." The gesture was small, practically meaningless compared to what I'd spent over the years. But symbolically, "You don't have to pay me rent, Mom." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm. "I've been living on your charity for 8 years without acknowledging it. I won't do that anymore." I studied my mother's face, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. Not the imperious social butterfly or the oblivious spendthrift, but a 75-year-old woman trying to figure out how to rebuild relationships she'd damaged through decades of self-absorption. "The senior community has a lovely garden," she said. "And there are activities, book clubs, bridge tournaments. I think I might enjoy having friends my own age instead of trying to relive my youth through Vicky's adventures." "That sounds good." I was hoping. Dorothy hesitated, then pushed forward with characteristic determination. "I was hoping you might visit sometime. Maybe we could have lunch, get to know each other properly. I realize I've spent 48 years assuming I knew who you were instead of actually listening to you." The invitation surprised me. After months of silence, after the public humiliation at the engagement party, I'd assumed Dorothy would never forgive me for destroying her vision of our family's financial stability. "I'd like that," I heard myself say. Dorothy's smile was tentative but genuine. "Good. I'll call you once I'm settled." After she left, I sat in my office holding the rent check and trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in my adult life, Dorothy had seen me as a person rather than a function. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and maybe that was more valuable. Present day, 1 year later, the book proposal is extraordinary, the publisher said, leaning back in her chair. A memoir about financial family dynamics, women's invisible labor, the psychology of sacrifice. It's exactly what readers want right now. I was in New York, in a Manhattan office 30 floors above the street, discussing something I'd never imagined, turning my story into a book that might help other women recognize their own worth. The working title is The Invisible Daughter, my agent explained. Margaret's story touches on so many contemporary issues: family financial abuse, women's tendency to self sacrifice, the way society undervalues certain types of work. And the ending? The publisher asked, "Do you reconcile with your family?" I considered the question. In the past year, my relationship with each family member had evolved in different directions. Dad and I had coffee every Tuesday morning. He'd started seeing a therapist about his depression and had even begun doing some part time consulting work. Not enough to support himself, but enough to feel useful again. Dorothy had indeed moved to the senior community, where she discovered a talent for organizing social events and had made what appeared to be genuine friendships. We had lunch once a month, careful, polite meals where we were learning to talk to each other like adults rather than like disappointed parent and defensive child. Vicky was the most complicated. She'd kept the cosmetics counter job for 8 months before getting promoted to assistant manager. We exchanged Christmas cards and birthday texts, but we hadn't had a real conversation since the engagement party. I thought she might be genuinely proud of her independence, but I also suspected she blamed me for the end of her fairy tale romance. "It's not a reconciliation story," I said finally. "It's a boundary story. Some relationships can be repaired when people are willing to do the work. Others need to be redefined. And some need to be released with love." The publisher nodded approvingly. "That's much more honest than a neat happy ending." "The target audience is women who feel invisible in their own families," my agent added. "Women who give and give without being seen or appreciated. Margaret's story shows them that they have more power than they realize." After the meeting, I walked through Central Park thinking about power and visibility and the strange journey that had brought me from invisible daughter to published author. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "How did it go?" "They want the book," I replied. "Publishing next fall. Celebration dinner when you get home?" I smiled, thinking about the life I'd built in Charleston. My expanded accounting firm, my relationship with Dad, my friendship with Helen, the small condo that belonged entirely to me. Not the life I'd planned, but the life I'd chosen. "Absolutely," I texted back. My treat. Epilogue: 2 years after the engagement party, the mail forwarding service sent me a wedding invitation with a Charleston postmark. Expensive paper, elegant printing, a name I recognized. "Victoria Bennett requests the pleasure of your company at her marriage to David Chen." I studied the invitation, noting the modest venue, a small historic inn rather than the Harbor Club, and the simple wording that suggested a much more intimate affair than the spectacle she'd originally planned. There was a handwritten note tucked inside. "Maggie, I know we haven't talked, but I wanted you to know that David and I are paying for everything ourselves. We both have good jobs now, and we wanted to start our marriage the way we plan to continue it, as equal partners. I understand if you don't want to come, but I hope you know that I finally understand what you tried to teach me. Love, Vicky." I set the invitation on my kitchen counter and considered my options. The safe choice would be to send a polite decline and a generous gift. The complicated choice would be to attend and risk reopening old wounds. My phone rang. Dad's number. "Did you get Vicky's invitation?" he asked without preamble. "Just opened it. Are you going?" I looked out my window at the harbor view I'd purchased with proceeds from the house sale. A view I could afford because I had finally learned to value my own contributions. "I think so," I said. "As long as she understands that I'm coming as Margaret Bennett, successful business owner and published author, not as the invisible daughter who cleans up messes." "I think she might actually prefer that version of you," Dad said with a chuckle. "What about you? Are you going?" "Your mother and I are going together," he said. "As friends. We're not getting back together, but we're learning to be family in a new way." After hanging up, I picked up Vicky's invitation again. The venue was beautiful, but modest. The guest list would be small. The couple was paying their own way and starting their life together as equals. Maybe my sister had learned something after all. I reached for my phone to RSVP yes, then paused to text Helen. "Want to be my plus one to a wedding? I promise this one will be much less eventful." Her response came immediately. "With you? Nothing is ever uneventful. But yes, I'll come. Someone needs to document your family's continuing evolution." I laughed. thinking about how far we'd all traveled from that Sunday afternoon when the invisible daughter finally learned to speak up. Not every story ended with perfect reconciliation, but some stories ended with something better: truth, boundaries, and the kind of respect that had to be earned rather than assumed.